The morning light filters through the tall windows of the Heritage Preservation Institute in Charleston, West Virginia, casting geometric shadows across the restoration laboratory. Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old photograph conservator with 12 years of experience, arrives at 7:15, exactly as she does every Tuesday morning. She carries a thermal mug of black coffee and a leather portfolio containing documentation from yesterday's work. The laboratory smells of archival paper, chemical fixatives, and the faint mustiness that clings to historical artifacts no matter how carefully they are preserved. Sarah's workspace occupies the corner of the lab, where she has arranged her equipment with meticulous precision. High-resolution scanners, digital microscopes, specialized lighting arrays, and color-calibrated monitors create a technological fortress around her restoration table. On this particular morning, a cardboard archive box sits waiting for her attention. The box arrived 3 days ago from the Bramwell Historical Society, a small organization in Mercer County that operates on donations and volunteer hours. The accompanying documentation explains that the contents belonged to the estate of Margaret Eleanor Thornton, who died at age 97 in a nursing home outside Bluefield. Margaret had no living relatives, and her possessions were being cataloged for potential donation to various historical institutions. Sarah carefully opens the box, her latex-gloved hands moving with practiced gentleness. Inside, she finds 23 items: daguerreotypes in deteriorating cases, cabinet cards with fading albumin prints, tintypes showing stern-faced men and women in their Sunday finest, and several early gelatin silver prints from the turn of the 20th century. These photographs represent ordinary lives from Appalachian coal country, the kind of historical record that larger museums often overlook in favor of more prominent families or significant events. Sarah understands the value of these anonymous faces. They tell the story of America that textbooks forget. The wedding photograph sits near the bottom of the box, protected by acid-free tissue paper. Sarah removes it with both hands, immediately noting its excellent condition despite its age. The photograph measures 8 by 10 inches, mounted on heavy board stock that has yellowed at the edges but remains structurally sound. The image itself shows remarkable clarity for 1887. A young bride and groom stand before a simple wooden church, their expressions solemn in the manner of 19th century portraiture. The bride wears an elaborate white dress with layers of delicate lace covering the bodice and sleeves. The groom stands rigidly in a dark suit, his hand resting on the bride's shoulder in a gesture that seems more possessive than affectionate. Sarah places the photograph under her examination light and begins her initial assessment. She notes the photographer's stamp on the mounting board, barely legible after more than a century: J. Whitmore, Bramwell, West Virginia. She makes notes about the image's condition, the quality of the original print, and the conservation work required. The photograph needs cleaning, stabilization of the mounting board, and digital archiving before it can be safely displayed or stored. This is routine work, the kind of project Sarah can complete in 2 or 3 sessions. She positions the photograph under her digital microscope for detailed examination. This is standard procedure, allowing her to document damage, identify the specific photographic process used, and create a high-resolution record before beginning any physical restoration. She starts at the top left corner, slowly panning across the image at high magnification. The church's wooden siding appears clearly, each weathered board distinct. The sky shows the characteristic grain of period photographic emulsions. The faces of bride and groom reveal the slight blur that results from subjects holding still for long exposures. Then Sarah reaches the bride's dress, specifically the elaborate lace covering her torso and arms. Under magnification, the intricate patterns of the lace create a mesmerizing abstract design. She adjusts the focus, bringing the deepest shadows of the fabric into clarity. The monitor shows every thread, every tiny imperfection in the antique textile. Sarah moves methodically across the bodice, documenting the dress's construction and condition. She stops. On her monitor, in the shadows between layers of lace near the bride's right shoulder, something appears that should not exist. At first, Sarah thinks it must be a defect in the photograph itself, perhaps damage to the emulsion or a developing error. She adjusts the magnification, increases the contrast, and applies different lighting filters to the digital image. The anomaly remains consistent across all viewing methods. It is a face. Specifically, it is a man's face, partially obscured by the lace but unmistakably present in the photograph. The face appears in profile, positioned as though someone stood directly behind the bride, close enough that the camera captured their features through the translucent fabric. The man's eye is visible, his nose, the line of his jaw. The expression on the partially visible face conveys something Sarah cannot quite identify. Fear, perhaps? Or desperation. Sarah sits back from her monitor, her heart beating faster than normal. In 12 years of conservation work, she has never encountered anything like this. She checks her equipment, running diagnostic tests to ensure the microscope and monitor are functioning correctly. She examines the original photograph with a handheld magnifier, confirming that the face exists in the actual image, not as a digital artifact. Under magnification, there can be no doubt. Someone stood behind this bride during the long exposure required for an 1887 photograph, close enough that their face appears ghosted through the lace of her dress. The discovery raises immediate questions. Was this intentional? Did the photographer notice? Why would someone hide behind the bride during her wedding portrait? Sarah's training has taught her to approach historical artifacts with objectivity to avoid imposing contemporary interpretations on the past. But standing in her laboratory, looking at this impossible face hidden in century-old lace, she feels the weight of a story demanding to be uncovered. Sarah spends the next 2 hours creating a comprehensive digital record of the photograph. She captures images at multiple magnifications and uses specialized software to enhance the hidden face. With each adjustment, more details emerge. The man appears young, perhaps in his 20s or early 30s. His expression shows clear distress. One of his hands is visible, reaching toward the bride's waist, the fingers blurred by movement during the exposure. This was not a planned photographic effect. Someone was actually standing there, hidden behind the bride's body and revealed only by the camera's ability to capture light passing through translucent fabric. By noon, Sarah has assembled a detailed presentation of her findings. She includes comparison images showing the photograph at normal magnification and the enhanced views revealing the hidden face. She prepares to contact her supervisor, Dr. Richard Hammond, who directs the Heritage Preservation Institute. This discovery extends beyond routine conservation work. It represents a genuine historical mystery, the kind of finding that could generate significant interest from academic researchers, genealogists, and the media. Before making that call, Sarah examines the other photographs from Margaret Thornton's estate. She finds several images from the same era and location, including what appears to be a photograph of the same church used in the wedding portrait. One image shows a group of miners outside a coal operation, their faces dark with dust, their eyes reflecting the camera's flash. Another shows a family gathering, perhaps 20 people arranged on the porch of a substantial house. Sarah studies each face, wondering if any of them might be the hidden man from the wedding photograph. She finds nothing definitive but notices something interesting in the family gathering photograph. One of the women in the back row bears a strong resemblance to the bride from the wedding portrait. The woman appears older, her face carrying the lines of someone who has experienced hardship, but the resemblance is unmistakable. Sarah checks the dates on the mounting boards. The family photograph was taken in 1903, 16 years after the wedding. If this is the same woman, she survived whatever circumstances surrounded that strange wedding day. Sarah picks up her phone and calls Dr. Hammond's extension. The director answers on the second ring, his voice carrying the slight rasp of a longtime pipe smoker. Sarah explains the discovery carefully, avoiding sensational language, sticking to observable facts. Dr. Hammond listens without interruption until she finishes. Then he asks a single question. Is she absolutely certain this is not a flaw in the photograph or a processing artifact? Sarah confirms that she has ruled out all technical explanations. This is a genuine image of a person standing behind the bride during the photograph's exposure to Dr. Hammond arrives at Sarah's workspace within 10 minutes. He is 62 years old, with decades of experience in historical preservation and a reputation for skepticism toward dramatic claims about historical artifacts. He examines the photograph under the microscope himself, adjusting the settings, checking the original print against the digital images. He spends nearly an hour reviewing Sarah's documentation before he speaks. When he does, his assessment is simple and direct. This is real. This is significant. And this is going to change how people understand this photograph and possibly the entire history it represents. The decision to investigate further happens quickly. Dr. Hammond contacts the Bramwell Historical Society, requesting any additional information about Margaret Thornton and the photograph's provenance. He reaches out to colleagues at West Virginia University's History Department, seeking expertise in Appalachian social history and 19th century photography. Sarah is assigned to continue her analysis while simultaneously beginning the careful process of conservation. The photograph must be preserved while the investigation proceeds. By late afternoon, the first response arrives from Bramwell. The Historical Society's volunteer coordinator, a retired teacher named Dorothy Chen, sends a lengthy email with attached scans of documents. Margaret Thornton's estate included several boxes of papers that the Society has not yet fully catalogued. Dorothy agrees to prioritize reviewing these materials for anything related to the wedding photograph. She mentions that Bramwell in the 1880s was a small but prosperous town, benefiting from the coal boom that was transforming southern West Virginia. Many families from that era left extensive records, including diaries, letters, and legal documents. Sarah reads the email twice, feeling the investigation beginning to take shape. The hidden face in the photograph is no longer just a conservation curiosity. It has become a portal into the past, a mystery that might reveal something significant about life in 19th century Appalachia. She thinks about the bride, standing in her elaborate dress, while someone hid behind her in desperation or fear. She thinks about the 16 years between the wedding photograph and the family gathering, wondering what happened during that time. The laboratory empties as evening approaches. Sarah remains at her workstation, unable to leave the photograph. She creates additional enhanced images, experimenting with different digital techniques to reveal more detail. In one enhanced view, she notices something she missed during the initial examination. The hidden man's hand, reaching toward the bride, wears a ring. The ring's design is unclear, but its presence suggests something about the man's identity or status. Married men in 1887 did not universally wear wedding bands, making this detail potentially significant. Sarah saves her work and begins securing the laboratory for the night. She places the photograph in a climate-controlled storage unit, ensuring it will remain safe until tomorrow. As she drives home through Charleston's evening traffic, her mind continues working on the mystery. She thinks about the photographer, J. Whitmore, who presumably developed this image and noticed the hidden face. Why did he deliver the photograph to his clients? What did they say when they saw it? Did they know the hidden man was there, or was his presence as shocking to them as it is to Sarah more than a century later? 3 days after the initial discovery, Sarah arrives at work to find her email inbox overflowing with messages. Dr. Hammond has shared the photograph with select colleagues in the academic community, and the response has been overwhelming. Historians, genealogists, photographic experts, and cultural anthropologists all want information. Several researchers have already begun investigating historical records from Mercer County, searching for details about the wedding, the couple, and the mysterious hidden man. The most substantive response comes from Dr. Patricia Vaughn, a historian specializing in Appalachian social history at West Virginia University. Dr. Vaughn has spent 20 years researching family structures, gender relations, and social conflicts in mining communities. Her email to Dr. Hammond, which he forwards to Sarah, runs to 3 single-spaced pages. She explains that the 1880s represented a period of rapid social transformation in southern West Virginia. The coal industry was attracting workers from diverse backgrounds, creating new towns and disrupting traditional social structures. Marriage in these communities often involved complex negotiations about property, social status, and family alliances. Dr. Vaughn expresses strong interest in identifying the people in the photograph and understanding the circumstances that led to such an unusual image. Dorothy Chen from the Bramwell Historical Society sends a second email with more substantial findings. She has located several documents in Margaret Thornton's papers that appear relevant to the investigation. One document is a letter dated September 1887, written by someone named Catherine Whitmore to her sister in Richmond, Virginia. The letter describes a wedding that took place in Bramwell that summer, mentioning an incident that caused considerable scandal in the small community. Dorothy has scanned the letter and attached it to her email, noting that the handwriting is difficult to decipher but the content seems directly relevant to the photograph. Sarah opens the scanned letter on her monitor, zooming in to read the faded ink. The handwriting is indeed challenging, using the elaborate cursive style common to educated women of that era. Sarah prints the document and spends her morning coffee break carefully transcribing it. The letter's contents prove both illuminating and disturbing. Catherine Whitmore describes a wedding that took place at the Methodist Church in Bramwell on June 14, 1887. The bride was Elizabeth Havers, daughter of Thomas Havers, who owned several coal properties in the region. The groom was Jonathan Prescott, the son of a prominent merchant family from Bluefield. The marriage represented an advantageous alliance between mining capital and commercial interests, exactly the kind of strategic union that characterized Appalachian elite society in this period. But Catherine's letter reveals that the wedding day was marked by a dramatic incident. She writes that a young man appeared at the church before the ceremony, demanding to speak with Elizabeth. The man, whom Catherine identifies only as a former employee of Thomas Havers, claimed that he and Elizabeth had an understanding, that promises had been made. Thomas Havers had the man forcibly removed from the church property. Catherine notes with evident disapproval that the entire incident demonstrated a shocking lack of propriety and that rumors circulated for weeks afterward about Elizabeth's relationship with this unnamed young man. Sarah reads the letter 3 times, feeling pieces of the mystery align. The hidden face in the photograph now has a potential context. This was not a random photographic accident. Someone with a connection to the bride, someone desperate enough to disrupt her wedding, somehow managed to position himself behind her during the formal portrait. The question becomes how and why. She calls Dr. Hammond with an update, and within an hour they convene an impromptu meeting with Dr. Vaughn, who drives down from Morgantown specifically for this discussion. The three of them gather in Dr. Hammond's office, a wood-paneled room lined with books about preservation techniques and Appalachian history. Dr. Vaughn is a compact woman in her early 50s, with short gray hair and intense blue eyes that seem to catalog every detail of her surroundings. She examines the enhanced photographs of the hidden face with the careful attention of someone trained to extract meaning from fragmentary historical evidence. Dr. Vaughn's analysis provides crucial context. She explains that marriages in mining communities like Bramwell often involved significant power imbalances. Wealthy mine owners like Thomas Havers controlled not only the economic livelihood of their workers but also various aspects of their personal lives. Company housing, company stores, and company policies created a system where workers had limited autonomy. If Elizabeth Havers had formed an attachment to one of her father's employees, such a relationship would have been viewed as completely unacceptable by families like the Havers. The social distance between owners and workers in these communities was carefully maintained and rigorously enforced. The conversation turns to the logistics of how someone could have hidden behind the bride during a formal photograph. Dr. Vaughn points out that wedding photographs in the 1880s required long exposures, sometimes lasting several seconds. The subjects had to remain absolutely still. If someone positioned themselves behind the bride, using her body to partially conceal their presence, they might not have been immediately visible to the photographer looking through his camera's viewfinder, especially if the photographer was focused on keeping the bride and groom properly positioned. Sarah adds her professional perspective about the lace. The fabric was delicate but not completely opaque. Under the intense sunlight required for photography in this era, light would have passed through the translucent material, carrying with it the image of whatever was behind it. The man's face appears ghost-like in the photograph because the camera captured both the lace's surface and the features behind it, creating a double exposure effect within a single frame. Dr. Hammond raises the crucial question that will drive the next phase of investigation. Who was this man? The letter from Catherine Whitmore does not name him. The historical record might contain his identity if they can locate the right documents. Marriage records, employment records from the Havers mining operations, church registers, newspaper archives, All these sources might contain the missing pieces. The search begins in earnest. Dr. Vaughn returns to Morgantown with high-resolution scans of all the photographs from Margaret Thornton's estate, promising to cross-reference faces with other known photographs from the region. Dorothy Chen commits to a comprehensive review of all materials in Margaret Thornton's papers and begins contacting descendants of other old Bramwell families who might have additional documents or family stories. Sarah continues her conservation work while simultaneously creating increasingly detailed enhancements of the hidden face, hoping that additional clarity might lead to identification. Over the following 10 days, the investigation generates substantial momentum. Dr. Vaughn locates newspaper accounts from the Bluefield Daily Telegraph that mention the Havers-Prescott wedding. The coverage is society news rather than investigative reporting, focusing on the dress, the decorations, and the prominent guests in attendance. No mention is made of any disruption. This is unsurprising. Newspapers in 1880s Appalachia depended on advertising from businesses owned by men like Thomas Havers. Unflattering stories about elite families rarely appeared in print. More useful information emerges from church records. The Methodist Church in Bramwell maintained detailed registers of baptisms, marriages, and deaths. Dr. Vaughn obtains copies of records from 1885 through 1890. The marriage of Elizabeth Havers and Jonathan Prescott appears on June 14, 1887, exactly as indicated in Catherine Whitmore's letter. The register lists witnesses and family members present at the ceremony, providing a snapshot of Bramwell's social hierarchy. The breakthrough comes from employment records. Dorothy Chen makes contact with the West Virginia State Archives, which holds partial employment records from several defunct mining companies. The Havers family operated 3 different coal properties in Mercer County during the 1880s. The archives have payroll ledgers from 2 of these operations covering the period from 1885 through 1890. Dorothy requests copies, and when they arrive, she begins the tedious process of reviewing hundreds of names and wage records. She finds what she is looking for on page 47 of a ledger from the Thornton Creek Mine, one of Thomas Havers' larger operations. An employee named Daniel Morrison worked at the mine from April 1885 through May 1887. His pay was higher than the average miner, suggesting he held a supervisory or technical position. His employment ended abruptly on May 28, 1887, less than 3 weeks before the Havers-Prescott wedding. The ledger includes no explanation for the termination, which was unusual. Most departures were noted as voluntary quit, injury, or dismissal for cause. Daniel Morrison's name simply stops appearing in the records. Dorothy sends this information to Sarah and Dr. Hammond with a note expressing cautious optimism. The timing fits perfectly with Catherine Whitmore's letter. If Daniel Morrison was the man who appeared at the church demanding to speak with Elizabeth, his dismissal from Havers' employment would explain both the timing and his desperation. Losing a mine position in 1880s Appalachia often meant leaving the region entirely. Jobs were scarce, and former employees of powerful men like Thomas Havers could find themselves blacklisted from other operations. Sarah begins searching for additional information about Daniel Morrison. Census records provide some basic facts. The 1880 census shows Daniel Morrison, age 19, living in Bramwell as a boarder in a house owned by a widow named Martha Reynolds. His occupation is listed as mine clerk. He was born in Virginia, both parents also born in Virginia. The 1890 census does not show him in Mercer County or anywhere else in West Virginia. He seems to have disappeared from the historical record after 1887. The investigation shifts to trying to confirm that Daniel Morrison is indeed the hidden man in the photograph. Dr. Vaughn contacts several archives and historical societies in Virginia, seeking any photographs or documents related to the Morrison family. Sarah creates the most detailed enhancement yet of the hidden face, focusing on distinctive features that might enable identification. The man's jawline is strong, his nose slightly crooked as though from an old break, his eyes set close together. 3 weeks after the initial discovery, Dorothy Chen makes another significant find. Among Margaret Thornton's papers, in a wooden box containing miscellaneous letters and receipts, Dorothy locates a small tintype photograph. The image shows a young man in work clothes, standing outside a wooden building with Thornton Creek Mine stenciled on its side. The man's face, though partially shadowed in the tintype's murky tones, bears an unmistakable resemblance to the hidden face in the wedding photograph. The resemblance is strong enough that Sarah, examining both images side by side under magnification, feels confident asserting they show the same person. The tintype has no identifying information, but its provenance within Margaret Thornton's estate suggests a connection. Dr. Vaughan and Sarah develop a hypothesis. Margaret Thornton, who died at 97, was born around 1926. If the tintype belonged to her family, it might have been passed down through generations. The Thornton Creek mine was named for a geographic feature, not a family, but some member of Margaret's family might have worked there or collected photographs from the operation. The connection remains speculative but plausible. With the tintype as supporting evidence, the investigators feel increasingly confident that they have identified the hidden man. Daniel Morrison, former mine clerk, dismissed from Thomas Haver's employment 3 weeks before Elizabeth Haver's wedding, desperate enough to intrude on the ceremony and apparently desperate enough to position himself behind the bride during the formal photograph. The narrative is taking shape, but crucial questions remain unanswered. What was the nature of Daniel and Elizabeth's relationship? How did he manage to hide behind her during the photograph? What happened to him after 1887? Sarah spends an evening searching through digital newspaper archives, casting a wider geographic net. She examines papers from Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio, looking for any mention of Daniel Morrison in the years following 1887. The search produces nothing substantial. Men named Morrison appear regularly in period records, but none matches the age and background of the Daniel Morrison from Bramwell. Then, almost by accident, Sarah finds something. While searching a digitized collection of Virginia county records, she discovers a death certificate from Russell County, Virginia, dated October 9, 1887. The deceased is identified as Daniel Morrison, age 21, occupation listed as laborer. The cause of death is recorded as accident, with no additional details. The certificate notes that he was buried in a pauper's grave at the county cemetery. Sarah stares at the death certificate on her screen, feeling the weight of tragedy settle over the investigation. Daniel Morrison survived only 4 months after losing his job at the Havers mine. 4 months after whatever confrontation occurred at Elizabeth Haver's wedding. 4 months after the photograph that captured him hidden behind the woman he apparently loved. He died young, alone, far from Bramwell, and was buried without ceremony in an unmarked grave. The discovery transforms the investigation from a historical curiosity into something more profound. This is no longer just about an unusual photograph. It is about Daniel Morrison's life, his relationship with Elizabeth Havers, and the social forces that destroyed him. Sarah feels an unexpected connection to this man who has been dead for 138 years. His face, captured accidentally in that wedding photograph, represents the only visual evidence that he existed, that he mattered, that his story deserves to be remembered. The identification of Daniel Morrison and the discovery of his death certificate prompt a shift in the investigation's focus. Dr. Vaughan suggests that understanding what happened requires uncovering more about Elizabeth Haver's life after her marriage. Census records, property records, and genealogical databases can provide a framework for tracking Elizabeth's trajectory through the decades following that June day in 1887. Sarah begins with census records, the backbone of American genealogical research. The 1890 census shows Elizabeth Prescott, age 22, living in Bluefield with her husband Jonathan Prescott, age 29. Jonathan's occupation is listed as merchant. They have one child, a daughter named Catherine, age 2. A domestic servant named Mary Sullivan, age 45, completes the household. The family appears prosperous and stable, exactly what one would expect from the union of two prominent families. The 1900 census tells a more complicated story. Elizabeth Prescott, now age 32, appears as head of household in a smaller residence in Bramwell. Her occupation is listed as none. She has 3 children, Catherine, age 12, Thomas, age 8, and Margaret, age 4. No husband is present. The census indicates that Elizabeth is widowed. Jonathan Prescott died sometime between 1890 and 1900, leaving Elizabeth to raise their children alone. This discovery leads Sarah to search for Jonathan Prescott's death record. She locates it in the Mercer County Courthouse records. Jonathan Prescott died on February 7, 1897, at age 36. The cause of death is listed as typhoid fever. He is buried in the Prescott family plot at the Bluefield Cemetery. The death would have been financially devastating for Elizabeth. While the Prescott family had commercial interests, much of their wealth was tied to the ongoing operation of their businesses. Jonathan's death likely left Elizabeth with some property but limited liquid assets. The 1910 census shows Elizabeth still living in Bramwell, now age 42, occupation seamstress. Her youngest daughter Margaret still lives with her. Catherine and Thomas have apparently left home. The household also includes a boarder named James Whitmore, age 55, occupation photographer. Sarah immediately recognizes the surname. J. Whitmore was the photographer who created the wedding portrait. James Whitmore is almost certainly the same man. By 1910, the photographer has become Elizabeth's boarder, an arrangement that suggests mutual financial necessity. Dr. Vaughn conducts research into James Whitmore's background and confirms that he operated a photography studio in Bramwell from approximately 1885 through the early 1900s. Local newspaper advertisements from the period show he specialized in family portraits, wedding photographs, and memorial photography. He was apparently never married and had no children. By 1910, when he appears as Elizabeth's boarder, his photographic business had likely declined due to competition from younger photographers and changing technology. The living arrangement between Elizabeth and James Whitmore raises intriguing questions about the wedding photograph. James would have been the man behind the camera on that June day in 1887. He developed the image and presumably noticed the hidden face immediately. Yet he delivered the photograph to the Havers and Prescott families. Did he discuss the anomaly with them? Did Elizabeth know that Daniel Morrison's face had been captured in her wedding portrait? And if she knew, what did she think about it over the decades that followed? Sarah continues tracking Elizabeth through subsequent census records. The 1920 census shows Elizabeth Prescott, age 52, still living in Bramwell, still working as a seamstress. Her daughter Margaret, now age 24, lives with her and works as a teacher. James Whitmore no longer appears in the household. Sarah searches for his death record and finds it quickly. James Whitmore died in 1913, age 58, cause of death recorded as heart failure. He left no estate of consequence. The 1930 census shows the final documented appearance of Elizabeth Prescott. She is now age 62, living with her daughter Margaret and Margaret's husband Robert Thornton. Robert's occupation is listed as mine foreman. They have 2 children, ages 6 and 3. Elizabeth's occupation is listed as nun, suggesting she had retired from seamstress work. The census indicates they live in a house owned by Robert Thornton, presumably purchased through his steady employment in the still active coal industry. Sarah realizes that Margaret Thornton, the woman whose estate contained the wedding photograph, was Elizabeth's granddaughter. The photograph had remained in the family for 3 generations, passed down through Elizabeth's direct descendants. This provenance explains why the photograph survived and eventually came to the Heritage Preservation Institute. It also suggests that the family knew the photograph's unusual nature and considered it significant enough to preserve. Dr. Vaughn locates Elizabeth's death record without difficulty. Elizabeth Havers Prescott died on January 3, 1941, at age 73. The cause of death is listed as pneumonia. She is buried in the Bramwell Cemetery, in a section reserved for longtime residents rather than in the elite Prescott family plot in Bluefield. This burial location suggests something about Elizabeth's social position in her final decades. Despite her marriage into the Prescott family, she ended her life as a working-class woman in a mining town, far from the social prominence her wedding day represented. With Elizabeth's life trajectory documented, Sarah turns her attention to finding any surviving correspondence or personal papers that might provide insight into her thoughts and feelings. Dorothy Chin continues her systematic review of Margaret Thornton's estate materials. In a cardboard box containing old letters and documents, Dorothy finds something remarkable, a diary covering the years 1936 through 1939, written in Elizabeth's own hand. The diary arrives at the Heritage Preservation Institute by courier. Sarah receives it in the same archival box that delivered the original photograph, and she experiences a sense of symmetry about this coincidence. The diary is a small leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed and brittle but still legible. Elizabeth's handwriting in her 70s has become shaky but remains clear enough to read. Sarah spends 2 full days transcribing the diary's contents, treating each page with the careful attention required by fragile historical documents. The diary focuses primarily on daily life, the weather, visits from grandchildren, church services, household tasks. Elizabeth writes in simple, declarative sentences with little emotional elaboration. But scattered throughout the mundane entries are passages that provide glimpses into her interior life and her memories of the past. On September 14, 1936, she writes about the anniversary of her father's death. Thomas Havers died in 1914, and Elizabeth notes that she has now lived more years without him than with him. She describes him as a hard man who believed he knew what was best for everyone around him. She adds that she obeyed him in all things and wonders sometimes what her life might have been if she had chosen differently. An entry from June 14, 1937, the 50th anniversary of her wedding day, provides more direct insight. Elizabeth writes that she has been thinking about the day she married Jonathan Prescott. She describes the church, the guests, the elaborate dress her mother insisted upon. She notes that Jonathan was kind to her during their 10 years together before his death. She adds a line that seems almost casual in its placement but carries enormous weight. She writes that there was someone else at the church that day, someone who should not have been there, someone she thinks about still even though 50 years have passed. Sarah reads this entry multiple times, feeling the emotional complexity beneath Elizabeth's restrained language. She thinks about someone still after 50 years. Daniel Morrison has been dead for 50 years when Elizabeth writes these words. His face is hidden in the wedding photograph that Elizabeth presumably saw many times over the decades. Yet she remembers him. The diary entry offers no explanation of their relationship, no details about what happened between them, but the fact of his continued presence in her memory speaks volumes. Another relevant entry appears on October 9, 1937, exactly 50 years after Daniel Morrison's death, though Elizabeth gives no indication she knows this date's significance. She writes about loss and about the choices young people make. She notes that when she was young, she believed adults understood the world and knew how to navigate it successfully. She has learned, she writes, that adults are just as confused and frightened as children, but they must make decisions anyway, and those decisions have consequences that last generations. Dr. Vaughn reviews the diary transcription and offers her professional interpretation. Elizabeth Havers Prescott lived a life shaped by the social structures of her time and place. Her marriage to Jonathan Prescott was almost certainly arranged by her father, following the customs of elite Appalachian families in the 1880s. Such marriages prioritized economic and social considerations over personal affection. The diary suggests that Elizabeth accepted this arrangement but never forgot the alternative represented by Daniel Morrison. She fulfilled her obligations as daughter, wife, and mother, but some part of her remained connected to the man who loved her enough to risk everything on her wedding day. Sarah begins developing a more complete understanding of the events surrounding the photograph. Daniel Morrison worked at the Thornton Creek mine, probably in an administrative or clerical capacity that brought him into occasional contact with Thomas Havers and his family. At some point, Daniel and Elizabeth met and formed an attachment. Whether this was a brief acquaintance or a sustained relationship remains unclear, but it was significant enough that Daniel believed they had an understanding. Thomas Havers discovered the relationship and dismissed Daniel from mine employment. Elizabeth, whether by choice or compulsion, proceeded with her planned marriage to Jonathan Prescott. The wedding day itself must have been tremendously difficult for everyone involved. Daniel appeared at the church, causing the scene Catherine Whitmore described in her letter. He was forcibly removed but apparently remained in the vicinity. During the formal photograph, while the bride and groom posed before the camera, Daniel managed to position himself behind Elizabeth. Whether this was a final desperate gesture or something Elizabeth facilitated remains unknown. The photographer, James Whitmore, captured the moment without realizing what his camera had recorded. When the photograph was developed and the hidden face became visible, decisions had to be made about what to do with it. The image could have been destroyed. Instead, it was preserved. This suggests that someone, possibly Elizabeth herself, wanted it kept. Over the decades that followed, as Elizabeth raised her children, buried her husband, worked to support herself, and eventually lived with her daughter's family, the photograph remained among her possessions. It was a reminder of what was and what might have been. The investigation into the hidden face in the 1887 wedding photograph has consumed 3 months when Dr. Hammond organizes a formal presentation of findings. The presentation takes place at West Virginia University, in a lecture hall filled with historians, genealogists, students, and members of the public intrigued by the story. Sarah, Dr. Vaughn, and Dorothy Chin stand together at the front of the room, preparing to share what they have uncovered. Sarah begins by displaying the photograph on a large screen. She shows the image as it appears at normal magnification, a conventional wedding portrait from the Gilded Age. Then she zooms in, revealing the hidden face. The audience responds with audible gasps and murmurs. Even though many have read about the discovery online or in newspaper articles, seeing the actual image creates a visceral impact. The face seems to stare out from the screen, bridging more than a century with its captured expression of anguish and longing. Sarah walks the audience through the technical aspects of the discovery, explaining the photographic processes of the 1880s and how the translucent lace created conditions that allowed the camera to capture both the surface of the fabric and the face behind it. She discusses the conservation work required to preserve the fragile photograph while enabling detailed examination. She projects multiple enhanced images, showing how digital technology can reveal details invisible to 19th-century viewers. Dr. Vaughn presents the historical context. She describes Bramwell in 1887, a small town experiencing rapid growth due to coal mining, a community where traditional social structures coexisted uneasily with new economic realities. She explains the Havers family's position in this society, the significance of Elizabeth's marriage to Jonathan Prescott, and the rigid class boundaries that made Elizabeth's relationship with Daniel Morrison socially impossible. She reads portions of Catherine Whitmore's letter, allowing the audience to hear a contemporary account of the wedding day's disruption. Dorothy Chin discusses the archival research that enabled identification of Daniel Morrison and documentation of Elizabeth's subsequent life. She projects census records, employment ledgers, and death certificates, transforming abstract historical concepts into concrete evidence of real lives. She explains how Margaret Thornton's estate, dispersed after a lifetime, brought this photograph to the Heritage Preservation Institute and made the discovery possible. She notes the randomness of historical survival. If Margaret had thrown away her grandmother's old photographs, this story would have been lost forever. The presentation's emotional core comes when Sarah reads selected passages from Elizabeth's diary. The audience listens in silence as Elizabeth's voice, preserved in fading ink, speaks across decades. Her restrained language and carefully controlled emotions make her occasional revelations of deeper feelings all the more powerful. When Sarah reads the entry from June 14, 1937, where Elizabeth acknowledges thinking about someone who should not have been at her wedding, several audience members visibly tear up. After the formal presentation, the event opens for questions. A genealogist asks whether any descendants of Daniel Morrison have been located. Dorothy explains that research continues but has not yet identified any family members. Daniel appears to have been alone when he died in Russell County, Virginia, and no siblings or parents have been documented. A historian asks about James Whitmore's motivation for preserving the photograph despite its unusual content. Dr. Vaughn suggests that Whitmore, as a professional photographer, may have recognized the image's documentary value even if he did not fully understand the story behind it. A young woman in the audience raises her hand and identifies herself as a graduate student studying gender and class in Appalachian history. She asks a question that cuts to the heart of the narrative. What agency did Elizabeth have in the events of her life? Was she a victim of her father's authority and social expectations, or did she make active choices? Dr. Vaughn responds thoughtfully, acknowledging the complexity of the question. Elizabeth lived in a society that severely constrained women's autonomy, particularly women from elite families whose marriages served economic and social functions. Yet within those constraints, women found spaces for resistance, accommodation, and subtle assertion of will. The preservation of the photograph might itself represent a form of agency, a way for Elizabeth to maintain connection with a part of her life that official history tried to erase. The presentation concludes with Sarah displaying the complete collection of photographs from Margaret Thornton's estate. The images appear on the screen in chronological sequence: daguerreotypes from the 1850s, the wedding portrait from 1887, family gatherings from the turn of the century, individual portraits from the 1910s and 20s. The collection represents 3 generations of one Appalachian family, their lives documented in the evolving technology of photography. The wedding portrait with its hidden face is the collection's most dramatic image, but every photograph tells a story about work, family, aspiration, and loss. After the presentation, Sarah returns to Charleston and resumes her normal conservation work. The wedding photograph undergoes complete restoration, cleaning, stabilization, creation of a new archival mounting, and production of museum-quality reproductions for display and research. The original will be stored in climate-controlled conditions at the Heritage Preservation Institute, where it will remain available for future scholars. Digital copies have been distributed to multiple archives and databases, ensuring the image's long-term accessibility. The discovery generates sustained media interest. National newspapers run feature articles about the hidden face. Photographic historians discuss the image in professional journals. Several documentary filmmakers express interest in creating longer treatments of the story. Sarah finds herself interviewed repeatedly, explaining the technical aspects of the discovery while trying to honor the dignity of the people involved. She emphasizes that Daniel Morrison and Elizabeth Havers were real people whose private tragedy has now become public knowledge. Their story deserves to be told with respect and sensitivity. 3 months after the presentation at West Virginia University, Dorothy Chen contacts Sarah with news. An elderly man in Abingdon, Virginia, has reached out to the Bramwell Historical Society after reading about the photograph. His name is David Morrison, and he believes Daniel Morrison may have been his great-great-uncle. David's family has limited information about this relative, who left Virginia in the 1880s and disappeared from family memory. But a few documents survived, including a letter written by Daniel's father in 1888, mourning the death of his son and expressing bitterness about circumstances the letter does not explain in detail. Sarah and Dorothy arranged to meet David Morrison at his home in Abingdon. He is 86 years old, a retired railroad worker who has spent years researching his family history. His small apartment contains filing cabinets filled with genealogical research, photocopied documents, and family photographs. David shows them the letter from Daniel's father, dated March 1888. The letter, written to a cousin in North Carolina, describes Daniel as a bright young man who had opportunities for advancement but got involved with a girl above his station. The father writes that Daniel lost his position because of this attachment and went to Russell County looking for work. He died there in an accident at a lumber operation. The father's grief comes through clearly in the prose, as does his anger at the Havers family, whom he blames for his son's death. David Morrison has no photographs of Daniel, but he has a photograph of Daniel's father and brothers, taken around 1875. The family resemblance is visible. David also has a Bible that belonged to Daniel's mother, with family births and deaths recorded on the flyleaf. Daniel Morrison's birth is listed as April 7, 1866. His death is recorded as October 9, 1887, with a single word added in different ink: heartbreak. Sarah asks David if he wants to see the wedding photograph, to see his great-great-uncle's face captured in that extraordinary moment. David considers the question carefully before saying yes. Sarah displays the enhanced image on her laptop, and David studies it in silence for several minutes. Finally, he says that Daniel looks like the Morrison men he remembers from his own youth. Strong features, determined expression, eyes that show both intelligence and pain. David says he is glad his great-great-uncle's story is being remembered. He is glad that Daniel loved someone enough to risk everything, even if that love destroyed him. The conversation with David Morrison provides the final piece of the puzzle. Daniel was not acting randomly or irrationally on Elizabeth's wedding day. He was a young man in love, facing the loss of everything that mattered to him, making a desperate attempt to preserve some connection to the woman he could not have. His presence behind Elizabeth during the photograph was simultaneously an act of love and an act of protest. He was saying, "I existed. This happened. You cannot erase me completely from her story." Sarah returns to Charleston with a deeper appreciation for the photograph's significance. It is not just a technical curiosity or a historical oddity. It is a document of resistance, a captured moment where someone refused to accept his erasure from a narrative controlled by power and privilege. Daniel Morrison could not prevent Elizabeth's marriage or change the social structures that destroyed their relationship, but he could ensure that some trace of his presence remained, even if that trace was invisible to everyone except a photographer developing his images in a darkroom. The Heritage Preservation Institute organizes a permanent exhibition about the photograph, placing it in context with other images from Margaret Thornton's estate and with explanatory text about Daniel, Elizabeth, and the social world they inhabited. The exhibition includes the enhanced views revealing the hidden face, the census records documenting their lives, and selected passages from Elizabeth's diary. It tells their story without sensationalizing it, presenting them as complex human beings navigating impossible circumstances. Sarah stands in the exhibition space on the day it opens to the public, watching visitors encounter the photograph for the first time. She sees them lean in close, studying the bride's elaborate dress, then step back in surprise when they notice the explanatory text about the hidden face. She watches them read about Daniel and Elizabeth, their separate trajectories through Gilded Age America, the ways their brief relationship shaped both their lives. Some visitors spend 10 or 15 minutes examining every detail, reading every word of text. Others move through quickly, glancing at the image without fully engaging with its implications. One visitor, a woman in her 30s with 2 young children, stops in front of the photograph for a long time. She reads the text carefully, then crouches down to explain the story to her children in age-appropriate terms. Sarah hears her tell them that the photograph shows something secret, something that people tried to hide a long time ago. She tells them that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that nobody wants to tell, and it is important to remember that everyone in history was a real person with feelings and hopes and sadness. The children listen seriously, staring at the photograph with the unself-conscious intensity of the young doctor. Vaughn publishes a scholarly article about the photograph in the Journal of Appalachian Studies. The article situates the image within broader patterns of class conflict and social control in Gilded Age mining communities. She argues that Daniel and Elizabeth's story exemplifies the human cost of industrialization and the rigid social hierarchies that characterized Appalachian development in this period. The article receives considerable attention from academics and generates new research into similar stories of forbidden relationships and social transgression in mining communities. Dorothy Chin continues working with the Bramwell Historical Society to identify and preserve other materials that document ordinary lives in southern West Virginia. She develops a particular interest in finding stories of working-class people who, like Daniel Morrison, left minimal trace in official records but whose lives mattered deeply to those who knew them. The Historical Society receives increased donations and volunteer support following publicity about the photograph, enabling expansion of their preservation efforts. Several months after the exhibition opens, Sarah receives a letter from a woman in Tennessee. The writer, whose name is Rebecca Talbot, explains that she is descended from Catherine Prescott, the daughter of Elizabeth and Jonathan. Rebecca has been researching her family history and recently learned about the photograph and the investigation into its origins. She writes that her grandmother, Catherine's daughter, told stories about great-grandmother Elizabeth that the family never fully understood. These stories suggested that Elizabeth had loved someone before her marriage, someone her father disapproved of, and that this early love remained with her throughout her life. Rebecca's grandmother said that Elizabeth kept a photograph from her wedding day that she would take out occasionally and study for long periods without explaining what she saw in it. Rebecca's letter includes a photograph she found among her grandmother's papers. The image shows Elizabeth as an elderly woman, probably in her 60s, sitting in a rocking chair on a porch. The photograph appears to have been taken in the early 1930s. Elizabeth's face shows the lines and weathering of a life spent working, but her expression suggests something else. A kind of quiet endurance, a sense of having survived experiences that could not be spoken about but were not forgotten. Rebecca writes that seeing the wedding photograph with Daniel's hidden face helped her understand her grandmother's stories and made Elizabeth seem more real, more fully human, than family legends alone could accomplish. Sarah responds to Rebecca's letter, thanking her for sharing this additional context. She asks if Rebecca would be willing to have the photograph of elderly Elizabeth added to the exhibition. Rebecca agrees enthusiastically. When the new photograph is installed beside the wedding portrait, visitors can see Elizabeth at 2 points in her life: young, in her elaborate dress, with Daniel hidden behind her, and old, alone on a porch, carrying decades of memory in her lined face. The two images together tell a more complete story than either could alone. As winter arrives in Charleston, Sarah reflects on the 3 months she has spent with this photograph and these lives. The investigation began as a conservation project, a technical problem to be solved through careful analysis and digital enhancement. It transformed into something deeper, an encounter with the past that demanded empathy, attention, and respect for the complexity of human experience. Daniel Morrison and Elizabeth Havers lived more than a century ago in a world that no longer exists. The Gilded Age social structures that shaped their lives have collapsed. The coal industry that dominated southern West Virginia has declined. The towns where they lived have changed beyond recognition or ceased to exist entirely. Yet their story retains power because it addresses universal aspects of human experience: love, loss, social constraint, and the ways people resist erasure from narratives they cannot control. The photograph itself remains an extraordinary object. Its technical properties, the accident of translucent lace and long exposure times, created an image that neither the photographer nor his subjects fully intended. But this accidental quality gives the photograph its documentary value. It captured something true that formal portraiture could not record: the presence of someone who was supposed to be invisible, the persistence of feelings that social convention demanded be suppressed. Sarah understands now that her work as a conservator extends beyond preserving physical objects. She is also preserving stories, maintaining connections between past and present, ensuring that voices like Daniel Morrison's are not lost to time. The photograph will outlast everyone currently alive. Future generations will encounter it, learn about Daniel and Elizabeth, and draw their own conclusions about love, class, agency, and resistance. On a quiet afternoon in December, Sarah returns to the exhibition to perform routine maintenance on the display. She checks the lighting levels, monitors humidity and temperature, examines the photograph for any signs of deterioration. Everything remains stable. The photograph continues to exist as it has for 138 years, bearing witness to a moment in 1887 when a young man refused to disappear. Sarah studies the enhanced image of Daniel's face one more time. The technology reveals details that would have been invisible in his lifetime: the precise angle of his jaw, the texture of his hair, the exact shape of his eye. But no amount of digital enhancement can reveal what he was thinking or feeling in that moment. Was he frightened? Defiant? Heartbroken? All of these He was a man watching the woman he loved marry someone else, knowing he had already lost, making one final gesture to assert that he existed and that what they felt for each other mattered. Elizabeth lived 54 years after Daniel's death. She raised 3 children, supported herself through widowhood, witnessed the transformation of Appalachian society from coal boom to bust, and carried memory of that June day in 1887 to her grave. The diary she kept in her 70s suggests she never forgot Daniel, never stopped thinking about alternative lives that social structure made impossible. The preservation of the photograph through 3 generations of her family indicates that she wanted some record of this story to survive, even if she could not speak about it openly during her lifetime. The exhibition now includes a final text panel that Sarah composed after reviewing all the research and correspondence. The panel acknowledges the limitations of historical knowledge. Much about Daniel and Elizabeth's relationship remains unknown and unknowable. The documentary record provides facts about birth, death, employment, and residence but reveals little about interior lives, emotional realities, and private conversations. The photograph offers a glimpse of these hidden dimensions, but it is only a glimpse, a single moment preserved amid countless unrecorded moments. The panel concludes with a statement about memory and responsibility. The past cannot be changed, but it can be remembered with honesty and compassion. Daniel Morrison and Elizabeth Havers deserve to be remembered not as symbols or cautionary tales but as human beings who lived, loved, suffered, and persisted within the constraints of their time and place. The photograph that accidentally captured Daniel's face offers an opportunity to remember them, to consider how social structures shape individual lives, and to recognize that every historical period contains stories of people who resisted erasure even when they could not achieve justice. Sarah locks the exhibition space and walks to her car through Charleston's early winter darkness. The city lights reflect off low clouds, creating an orange glow above the buildings. Traffic sounds echo off wet pavement. Sarah thinks about Elizabeth driving or walking these same streets a century ago when they were unpaved and lit by gas lamps. She thinks about Daniel Morrison dying alone in Russell County, Virginia, his body buried in an unmarked grave, his story forgotten by everyone except the woman he loved. The investigation is complete. The photograph has been conserved, researched, contextualized, and displayed. Additional discoveries may emerge as researchers continue examining records and descendants share family stories, but the essential narrative has been established. Daniel Morrison loved Elizabeth Havers. Social forces beyond their control destroyed any possibility of their relationship. Daniel died young and forgotten. Elizabeth lived a long life shaped by duty and loss. A photographer's camera accidentally preserved evidence of their story. More than a century later, conservation technology revealed what had been hidden, and people far removed from the original events committed themselves to remembering. Sarah drives home through the December night, thinking about the work that awaits tomorrow. Other photographs, other documents, other stories embedded in material objects that survive their creators. Each artifact represents someone's decision to preserve something, to assert that this object, this image, this scrap of paper matters enough to protect from destruction. Conservation work means honoring those decisions, maintaining the physical integrity of objects while trying to understand the human experiences they represent. The wedding photograph from 1887 will survive another century if properly maintained. Future conservators will examine it with technologies Sarah cannot imagine. They will bring their own questions and interpretations to Daniel and Elizabeth's story. The photograph will continue revealing new meanings as contexts change and new viewers bring their experiences to bear on these frozen faces from the Gilded Age. But the core narrative will remain. Two young people in Appalachian coal country, their relationship made impossible by class difference, captured in a single photograph where one stands visible and official while the other hides behind translucent fabric, insisting on a presence that society tried to deny. This is their memorial, preserved by accident and technology, offering testimony to the power of love and the persistence of memory against forces that sought to erase both.